Good afternoon. It's Tuesday, the 26th of June, 2018, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to the UK Column News. Your host today, Mike Robinson, myself, Brian Gerrish. And before we go any further, you should be aware, of course, that today it is yellow alert. Temperatures are rising. The British government feels that it's vital to warn people that the sun is shining so that, of course, you can take appropriate action, which I believe is run, hide, tell.
Yes, I think so, yeah. Yes, okay, and on that subject, let's move straight over to the OPCW because they are in special session today. Special session called by the UK. Boris Johnson is even there in person today. Fantastic. So they're going to, well, apparently they're going to unveil the long-expected report into the alleged chlorine gas attack in Douma a few months ago, if you remember, the one that didn't happen. That's likely to happen this afternoon. But anyway, Boris Johnson was there. Well, why? As we can see here, we need this meeting, he said, to reaffirm and defend the ban on chemical weapons, especially following the poisoning of Sergei and Yulia Skripal in Salisbury in March. That's the missing Sergei and Yulia Skripal, the two that haven't been seen for quite some time and aren't likely to be ever seen again. But what's this meeting really about? It's not really about the Skripals. It's following on from Theresa May's comments at the G7 summit a few weeks ago. If you remember, she said, at this summit we have discussed a range of issues: foreign interference in our democratic institutions and processes, and other forms of malign state activity pose a strategic threat to our shared values and interests. And she said today, G7 leaders agreed to establish a new rapid response mechanism. And of course, one of the rapid responses that she was talking about was the ability to attribute blame for certain events, whether there's any evidence for it or not. Not only attribute blame for certain events, but to have a single narrative across all the G7 nations. And she said that the OPCW in particular should be given extra powers to attribute blame, whether there's evidence or not. So that's what Boris Johnson is attempting to do in Geneva today with the OPCW. And of course, the Russians have said this. Of course, we're ready to counter Britain's initiative. I believe there'll be a serious discussion of the solution proposed by the UK and expect other draft decisions to be submitted. Well, we wait to see what the outcome of this is. But frankly, this rapid response mechanism, along with the fusion doctrine, continues to, well, move us towards some kind of fascist dictatorship, as far as I can see, where there is no sense of, proof that somebody is required, any level of proof that somebody is guilty of something, no presumption of innocence.
It's very simple. If the government puts its view forward, then the view of the government becomes the truth. You should believe that truth, and if you don't, then you're a rebel, you're a domestic extremist, and the government is going to crush you. This is where it's going very rapidly now, Mike. And of course, hand in glove, we've got the general suppression of free media, because nobody must have an opinion which is different from the government. The government doesn't need evidence in any way. While you were making that report, I noticed that somebody in our chat box has just posted that apparently on ITV, it's being reported that Salisbury homes that have apparently been poisoned are being bought for sums totaling £1 million. So I presume this is to help the street theatre, that the contamination is so bad it's gone into some people's homes. The government is going to step in and buy those homes, creating the evidence.
Oh, I think that's fantastic. That's a precedent being set there. So whenever the fracking really kicks off around the countryside and people's homes are being potentially destroyed as that,
the government will purchase those homes.
Undoubtedly purchase those homes as well. Okay, well that's a precedent being set. Now, yesterday we mentioned that, of course, there's a defence and foreign ministers meeting, a joint meeting in Brussels for the European Union, and we showed what Federica Mogherini was saying with regards to that. That meeting obviously took place and certain things were agreed. So let's have a look and see what she said at lunchtime.
First of all, we took important decisions to advance our EU defence work in preparation for the European Council. We adopted the rules for the governance of the permanent structured cooperation projects. So now the focus will be fully on the implementation of the 17 projects already existing, the preparation of the new set of projects to be adopted by November, and the work will start to prepare the conditions for third countries' participation to PESCO projects.
Now, what was particularly important about that, of course, Brian, was they're moving ahead with PESCO as they said they would be, and that's all fantastic. But you'll notice at the end of what she said there that she's particularly interested in how third countries will interface with PESCO, and of course that's with reference to the United Kingdom. We mentioned yesterday that Freddie Howe was, who's the Defence Minister, was in on that meeting yesterday, and it seems that it wasn't just PESCO that's being discussed. It wasn't just EU-NATO relations that were being discussed, but of course what seems to have come out of that is a new agreement, not a bilateral agreement this time, but several countries, France, Germany, Belgium, Denmark, Estonia, the Netherlands, Spain, Portugal and the United Kingdom have signed a letter of intent supporting a multinational alliance. And this is apparently to make sure that Britain can stay involved with EU defence once we leave the European Union. That's what they're saying. This is clearly an initiative that allows the association of some non-EU states, said the French Minister and the French Defence Minister, and the UK has been very keen because it wants to maintain cooperation with Europe beyond bilateral ties. Well, they think this is one of the points that we've been making very strongly for quite some time. That's fantastic. What can we say?
Well, I think one of the things we could say, Mike, and again, another comment that came up earlier with the picture of Theresa May there, she's looking extremely tired and drawn. I think a lot of pressure coming on Theresa May as she's told what she will be doing next. And I see the same with Federica Mogherini. She's looking haggard, lots of makeup on, looking tired. The pressure is really on now of the supranational EU state to get itself formulated with this unified military structure and the Treasury, of course.
Absolutely. And as we mentioned yesterday, they also agreed the next steps on the military mobility action plan, which again, part of EU military unification. That's all about making sure that the so-called military Schengen, that arms and material and men can move from one side of Europe to the other with no barriers to cross borders and so on. But Brian, what was quite amusing was that while this was all going on, the Defence Committee has published this document, Indispensable Allies, US, NATO and UK Defence Relations. This is an attempt to raise military spending to 3% of GDP. It follows on from the furore over the weekend with Gavin Williamson claiming that he was going to bring down Theresa May's government unless she agreed to this. But I just thought the timing was hugely significant because they've decided, because the BBC, the BBC and other UK media focusing on this issue and pretty much ignoring what was going on in Europe yesterday. I think I saw what was going on in Europe yesterday covered in the Express to some degree, not in its entirety, but not really anywhere else. They were all focusing on this. This is Defence Select Committee saying that we've got to increase spending, that they're wanting 3% of GDP to be spent, that a rise to 2.5%, however, would comfortably fill the black hole in the existing Ministry of Defence budget. The report says the government must not allow the UK's usefulness to the United States diminish. They can't allow that to happen. You can't put the special relationship at risk. And Madeleine Moon, who's on the committee, Labour MP for Bridgend, a friend of ours, I believe.
Or not.
Yes. Said that the UK's armed forces have been hollowed out. Is that not a word that you used?
It was, Mike.
Yes.
Fairly regularly.
And that the Navy was very weak and that air capability was diminished. But don't worry, influence is really important because unless you can back it up with capability, you have no credibility. So yeah. we're gonna need to spend more.
And that was Madeleine Moon's professional opinion as a long-standing social worker, of course.
Yes, indeed.
But presumably it's people like Madeleine Moon that are bringing in the solutions to UK's problems, military problems. And we just thought we should bring this one on today to show where it's got to. But apparently it's being suggested that we should be using inflatable tanks in a bid to confuse enemies on the battlefield. Now, the beauty of this story is that, of course, inflatable tanks were used with some considerable success as a decoy in the lead up to the invasion of Europe, and they were there to confuse photographic reconnaissance by the Luftwaffe. But now the idea is that we haven't got enough tanks, so we're going to use inflatable tanks in order to confuse those nasty Russians into thinking that we have more tanks than we really do. This is real. Let's remember that we've got this illustrious man, the Minister of War, Gavin Williamson, and this is the state of Britain's armed forces at the moment. Now, I'd just like to say at this point, of course, we have to point a finger in several directions because for at least 20 years, we've had exceptionally senior British military officers that have run away from politicians as the cuts have come into force. So we have to point a finger at the so-called gold braid in the military for not having the guts to stand up to the politicians. We've got a programme that's been brought in order to decimate the military, so that's cuts in equipment, cuts in manpower, and general chaos in reorganisation, future promises of growth, general chaos in the procurement system, and the running down of Britain's strategic industries such as steel production, for example, and the production of armoured vehicles ourselves. So all of that has gone on. Senior military people have said next to nothing. But of course, this is a planned action across the Labour Party and the Conservative Party, culminating in those dirty deals which were in the residence of the British ambassador in Paris, facilitated by the charity, the Franco-British Council. So deliberate breakdown of the military. Now the public is told, well, don't worry, we're going to produce blow-up tanks and we're going to spend more on the very chaos which is causing the problem in the first place. So this isn't accidental policy, this is deliberate policy to confuse the nation, and we have to see through it. One man who won't be seeing through it is local Conservative MP Gary Streeter. This is him in the Plymouth Herald, I think it was Friday, but he's giving a warning that there's going to be a rebellion by Conservative MPs if the Conservative government under Theresa May doesn't spend more on the shambles that is defence at the moment. And I'd just like to say the duplicity of this man is just astonishing because, of course, he was a Remain voter, but now he's totally happy with Brexit. Well, he would be because there's no exit in the Brexit. But he's fighting for defence after denying there was a defence problem, especially when the UK column warned him. And what did he do? He got personally abusive with me on that subject and refused to have any discussion. And just so that people know what we were talking about at the time, the Telegraph had quite correctly published a major story saying that the Ministry of Defence denies Britain's entire fleet of attack submarines are out of action. That was the situation, but Gary Streeter said that we were simply talking nonsense. Now he's hopping in to say we should pour more money into this shambles. Is it ignorance, do you think, Mike, or the lack of mental acumen he simply can't understand?
No, I don't think it's even that.
What is it then, do you think?
I think he probably knows exactly what he's doing, and he's just willing to
Stir
mislead
the pot.
and so on. Yes.
And help mislead the public.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay, quick reminder, AV9 DVDs, this is the last week that they're available at this price. They are available in the UK column shop, so get yours now if you possibly can. Now, this article was published last week. It passed us by, but I thought it's worthwhile having a look at it because there's been some subsequent developments. So I chose the one from City AM. It got some reasonably widespread coverage in the British mainstream media. Explosive report published into Lloyd's handling of HBOS Reading fraud case. Now, we've been talking about Lloyd's and HBOS over the last couple of weeks because of the comments being made by Noel Edmonds and the fact that he was trying to hold HBOS to account and Lloyd's to account at the annual general meeting. But this is a new report. It comes out of the Project Lord Turnbull report. And basically what happened was that the report last week was leaked. It was leaked online, and this caused pretty big embarrassment for several people, lots of people, including KPMG. So the report, it is in a draft form, so it hasn't been published yet. So the draft was leaked, and it alleges that there's been historic fraud at HBOS Reading branch by senior management prior to the Lloyd's takeover in 2008. And so it goes on. But basically what's happened now is that the Fair Business Banking, the all-party parliamentary group for Fair Business Banking, has made some comment on this. They said that the report makes serious allegations against KPMG and that the all-party parliamentary group will write to Stephen Hadrill, the Chief Executive Officer at the FRC, to press for new investigation into the KPMG audit of HBOS with regard to the Reading fraud in February 2008, which gave the bank a clean bill of health only 2 months before it hit financial difficulty. Well, the KPMG themselves have clearly responded to this. They've said, we strongly refute the allegations in the report with regards to KPMG, which we believe to have no basis in fact. Prior to its publication, we had not seen the project Lord Turnbull report and have had no involvement in its preparation. They said it's very concerning to us that such serious and defamatory allegations have been made in circumstances where the author of the report has not had the benefit of reviewing any of the relevant audit working papers. It's also unclear to what extent the report has taken into account or has taken account of or accurately represented the relevant professional obligations of an auditor. A previous Parliamentary Commission on Banking Standards report had said that HBOS was carrying £47 billion of losses when it was bailed out by the government, and that was despite having been given a clean bill of health by KPMG. So of course bailed out by the taxpayer, so there's that on one side, and then there's also the fraud which Noel Edmonds is trying so hard to expose at the moment. So this situation just continues to build into a mess, well, we look forward to see what comes next. Just going back to the all parliamentary party group on fair business banking, I am interested to notice that all the other APPGs that I've noticed have websites which are built upon the government platform, the government web platform. These guys have registered their own domain and set up their own website away from the parliamentary website platform. And I just wonder, I'm just wondering what the reason for that is. Is there some difference between this particular all-party parliamentary group and others? I just wanted to mention that on the way and see if anybody has any clues.
Well, perhaps we could perhaps we could ask our audience today to have a look into that one for us. That would be very good if you can do some research to establish why this should be set up as a sort of separate group of people. One could say independence. On the other hand, maybe they've moved away from government and a little bit closer to the banks. I just wanted to comment, Mike, that it's quite remarkable that, of course, that Turnbull report has come out of the reports of whistleblowers who have blown what was happening in HBOS. And we know the fraud has happened because that's already been fully and widely appointed. KPMG were the auditors. The fraud was not made public by KPMG, but there's no problem, and we should look at what KPMG have to say.
Yes.
I think there's some wonderful media spin there from KPMG, but we'll see. Let's change the subject and come on to children. And I was just astonished to get this article through this morning. Somebody said, I think you need to look at this. The headline from the Mail was, child rapist who abused 4 children as young as 8 enjoyed a day out to Buckingham Palace when his wife was given an MBE by Prince William. Ian Knight, 55, who is a former soldier, was found guilty of 10 sex offences. The beast attended the palace with his wife, Major Pauline Murray Knight. Celebrities such as Ed Sheeran and J.K. Rowling were also honoured. Warwickshire Crown Court was told he raped an 8-year-old girl several times. Well, the first bit to say is that the response from the palace was no comment. But I think that the Daily Mail hasn't been quite accurate with this story, because if we have a look, it says this: following the palace trip in December, Knight of Nuneaton, Warwickshire, was jailed for 12 years in March. So the real question, was he out on bail when he attended the palace? And the Daily Mail doesn't answer that. The headline leads you to believe that a convicted sex offender was attending the palace, when in fact that trial was in its early stages, or at least the police investigation. However, it's fascinating, isn't it? Because apparently the lady in the picture there is involved with counselling and questioning people who've been sexually assaulted. So there's some
pretty murky stuff.
There's some very murky stuff there. Well, if that's one problem for the palace, on Friday, this was the headline, certainly everywhere in Plymouth, which was that former Royal Navy Commander Charles Howeson had been found guilty. He was sentenced to 7.5 years. This is for 10 offences, sexual assault offences, to 8 young men. It appeared in Plymouth. The BBC did carry it a little bit in the Daily Mail, but the Daily Mail hasn't reported anything during the trial at all, Mike, which I found rather interesting. This was reported strongly by local papers, and this was his links through to the royal family. This man seemed to have an uncanny ability to call in high-level members of the royal family to support his various causes.
And he seemed to have quite a few high-level people offering him character references at the court cases.
I think there were 35 in total, including former politicians, admirals, lords. This was part of his defence, that he was such a wonderful, upstanding man, he couldn't possibly have committed these crimes. And I think that leads us in nicely to what the judge had to say. Let me read you through this, and we'll see why actually these things worked against him. You displayed the finest qualities of diplomacy, charisma, endeavour, organisation and charm, which you demonstrated during your period in the Navy and in your extensive and successful career and involvement at the very highest level with public bodies, authorities, businesses, including a bank, that was Coutts Bank, but also in your public and charitable works, mainly associated with the community of Plymouth. And the judge went on, he said this: the hidden and dark truth is these same qualities were the very qualities which enabled you to mask and conceal a dark secret only revealed for the world to see some 30 years later in this trial. That secret was your uncontrolled and predatory sexual behaviour towards particularly young or at least vulnerable men under your control. And I think that was a pretty important analysis, because of course his defence had been on that he was so upstanding, he was so good at what he did in business and charities, he was untouchable. The judge seemed to see through that. But credit to this man, who's the local police detective constable, Endicap, who is the man who stayed on the case with Mr. Howeson and has ultimately been rewarded by this conviction. He said these victims have waited a very long time for justice to be served. They have acted with dignity throughout the proceedings. The effects of Charles Howeson's offending on them are lifelong lasting, and it has been devastating for themselves and their families. It's resulted in people feeling that they have to leave the city, leave their employment, hide it from their partners and family and work, even changing their names to hide. For some, they've carried this up to 32 years. And he ends by saying, but what we've shown is that nobody is above the law. So I'm going to say, what a fantastic policeman to stay on this case. I'm also going to add that although there's a lot more I'd like to comment, we know that Charles Howeson is currently putting in an appeal against his sentence, and therefore, to be prudent, we're going to be very measured in what we say until that appeal hearing has taken place. But nevertheless, a sentence of 7.5 years, so he should spend at least half of that in prison. And before we leave the subject, I think this is a very important headline for us at least, that we've got to remember that this man's offending was absolutely encouraged by a blatant cover-up by the Royal Navy and another charity, the Groundwork Trust, that he was working for. So the Royal Navy did not take the proper procedures. In fact, one of the senior officers who said he was part of a censuring, or should have been part of a censuring, of Charles Howeson following an offence on board the frigate HMS Cleopatra, was later recalled into court because he had forgotten to say that he was the man who should have written the letter. And the charity, the Groundwork Trust, knew what had happened, knew the testimony of the victims of those attacks, but decided they wouldn't go to the police, and Charles Howeson was simply released. So we just remind people, of course, it was the UK column that printed the story on the abuse of children at Oxford and Cherwell Valley College. We were alone in warning what was going on here, and Prince Andrew had a visit to the college, indeed the very workshop where some of the worst abuses had taken place, even when we telephoned his personal aide to say to him that there's something nasty going on at the college. Very interesting to see here that in 2002, a gentleman had requested Freedom of Information response asking for the correspondence to do with that visit by the Duke of York to Blackbird Leys campus, that is the OCVC campus. And I was intrigued to see here, Mike, that they redacted who the email had come from originally. So the college has got nothing to hide, but nobody wants to admit to dealing with the royal family. And of course, we pointed out at the time that the cover-up included 3 key women. So we had Sally Dickett's, the head of Oxford Cherwell Valley College. We had Sarah Thornton, obviously the lady in the police uniform, as the head of Thames Valley Police, and Joanna Simmons, who was the chief executive of Oxford Council. All of these women were common purpose leaders, and they were all rewarded, or had been rewarded by the palace for their good works with medals. So astonishing that all these people can be connected to the palace, but despite all of that security around the royal family, nobody knows, Mike. And just so that we remember, again, it was the UK column that asked the key question, who nominated Jimmy Savile for his knighthood? And nobody wanted to reply to that question. And I think I'm correct in saying that nobody to this date has replied. If anybody has got further information on this, we'd love to know. And I'll end the segment by saying that just remarkable that on Saturday was the Fresh Start talk in Aberdeen, and the Fresh Start team had 2 venues cancelled at the last moment. So my question is, were those venues warned off, or were they actually part of the overall cover-up of child abuse in Scotland themselves? It's fascinating to watch this lot break surface.
Yes. So, well, the Electoral Commission has been busy today. They have released a press release saying urgent improvements needed to ensure transparency for voters in the digital age. Well, this is really about Brexit in some ways, Brian, because they're calling for urgent reforms to electoral law. Apparently after what are being described in the mainstream media as a series of online political campaign scandals. This, for example, involves the scandal with Cambridge Analytica, and they're particularly concerned about the types of advertising and promotional material that's appearing online. So they have called for a change in the law to require all digital political campaign material to state who paid for it, bringing online adverts obviously in line with printed material and leaflets and so on. They want new legislation to make it clear that spending in UK elections and referenda by foreign organisations and individuals is not allowed. They want to increase the maximum fine, which is at the moment £20,000 per offence. So they want to be able to impose more. They want tougher requirements for political campaigns to declare spending soon after or during a campaign rather than much later. and they want all campaigners to provide more detailed paperwork on how they spend money online. They said urgent action must be taken by the UK's governments to ensure, you notice it said UK's governments, anyway, to ensure that the tools used to regulate political campaigning online continue to be fit for purpose in a digital age. Implementing our package of recommendations will significantly increase transparency about who is seeking to influence voters online, and the money spent on this at UK elections and referenda. Well, they're particularly interested in Facebook as well, so they want to see who's spending money on Facebook. I would imagine all roads lead back to Russia on this one.
Almost certainly.
Probably what's going on here.
Yeah, and I'll just add that apparently, according to our chat box, Russia is buying up cocktail sticks.
Really?
Apparently so. These are going to be used, of course, to deflate the blow-up tanks.
Good stuff. Excellent. That's impressive. Okay, here's Public Health England. Now, of course, Public Health England knows lots about Novichok and the best way to deal with it, which is, of course, baby wipes. But in this case, they have published a survey which they say that reveals women experience severe reproductive health issues. Now, I would have thought that if women were experiencing severe reproductive health issues, that they would be sad. But in fact, the image that goes along with this is a group of women all beaming with big wide smiles. So they're clearly extremely happy that they're experiencing severe reproductive health issues. So there's a bit of a psychological operation going on with this article, in my opinion. But anyway, that's just my opinion. I noticed when the BBC covered this, when the BBC covered this article, their headline was that lots of under 25s are not enjoying sex. Now, you may well ask why the two different articles, why the two different headlines. The reason is that one of the things that the Public Health England is saying is that in order to have good reproductive health, probably good sex is a part of that. Now, that doesn't matter. The key point is that the Public Health England's focus is on reproductive health, and particularly the ability to have children, whereas the BBC decided it's probably better not to focus on that particular aspect, and I wonder why. So what they're saying is here that 7,300 women surveyed, and that a large proportion of them are struggling to conceive. They're having reproductive health issues, and this piece of work done by Public Health England, launched after Dame Sally Davies, who's the Chief Medical Officer, called for the increase of awareness, dissemination of information and person-centred care around reproductive health in a report she issued in 2014. Now, at this point, Brian, I just wanted to remind everybody of some comments that Barry Trower made in an interview you did with him. I believe it was in 2013. Well, let's have a listen to what he said.
Last April, I had a phone call from the Irish Doctors Environmental Association, and they said, would you address our annual conference in Dublin? And we want one specific thing that we want you to talk about, and only that. They said, don't go into anything else, don't go into Tetra, don't go into the effect on the planet, nothing at all, just this. And I said, okay, what is it? And they said, we want you to talk about the effect of low-level microwave radiation on the ovarian follicles of schoolgirls. And I said, fine, I can do that. I prepared my talk. I gave it on early Saturday afternoon in Dublin to the Irish doctors. They asked questions during the afternoon. They block booked a restaurant, and I was faced questions on this Saturday evening. They asked me to come back on the Sunday, and I had further questions just to do with this from the doctors. I had further questions from 11 o'clock Sunday morning to 4 o'clock Sunday afternoon, when I had to leave to come back to get my plane. So I was questioned all Saturday afternoon, Saturday evening, Sunday. I say this because with all the different disciplines, the research which I had stood its ground.
Now, Barry Trower went on because a significant part of that interview was about the issue of microwave radiation and the effect that it has on young teenage girls and their potential ability to have children subsequently, and whether those children are going to be subject to birth defects. And he's talking about Wi-Fi in schools. He's talking about microwave transmissions as well as mobile phone technology and so on. This is an area where the research which is already published is being pretty much suppressed, and much more research needs to be done. I'm going to show that full interview immediately after this program if anybody wants to watch it. But the point here is that Public Health England has published a report describing a pretty significant number of people who are having reproductive health issues, and this subject is not being discussed publicly in the mainstream press or amongst politicians or amongst or from Public Health England, in fact. And so I'm just putting this out to make a suggestion that perhaps this is a subject that should be discussed and we should be looking quite seriously at it.
Particularly as 5G is on the horizon.
Well, in fact, towards the end of that interview, which, if you remember, as I said, I think we recorded that in 2013. Barry Trower before 5G was ever mentioned, he's starting to talk about phase modulation of microwave energy and what that has the potential to do. It's extremely interesting and extremely pertinent to what's going on with 5G, yes.
And we'll say if people do watch that video, please share the information with others. This is the whole point about getting it out there. Well, if the serious reality of reproduction is not being told in the mainstream press and media, we've got another attack going on young people. And thank you very much to the viewer who flagged up this one. They'd basically seen information talking about transforming relationships and sexuality education. It said research involving children and young people on their experiences of gender and sexual violence has changed Welsh legislation, sparked youth activism on sexual injustice and violence, and is reshaping relationships and sexuality education in schools. So that's all quite a claim. Where did this lot come from? Well, it's this organisation, which is Economic and Social Research Council, Shaping Society. We're onto the sort of think tank issue here, Mike, but this is really incredible stuff. Encourage people to go to the website and find this, to have a look at the video.
But they want to shape society.
They want to shape society. And little embedded video there, which is the key one to watch. It's breathtaking. In case you wonder, the lady on the right in that picture is actually the professor. So this is a close-up of her. This is Professor Emma Reynolds, and it's her policy which is now working through young teenagers in schools and is becoming the formal policy of the Welsh Government. So I don't know what goes on in this lady's mind. What I perceive from looking at the video and listening to what she has to say is I don't really like her agenda, but somehow she's powerful enough to get this agenda to be the agenda of the Welsh Government. So this is a bit of information on what she's got to talk about. She said she has got she's done extensive research on the role of education in preventing gender and sexual violence, and this is where the references the Welsh Government comes in. She's been a member of the Welsh Government's National Violence Against Women Advisory Group, and she says that she's helped shape the This Is Me campaign to challenge harmful gender stereotypes. She's worked with 50 young people, and they've produced the bilingual online toolkit Agenda, a young people's guide to making positive relationships matter. And in the first 12 months, that's gone out to 1,400 young people, 1,000 practitioners, 500 teachers, and 100 academics. So one woman, Mike, has got this level of influence. 40 young people were trained as Agenda youth ambassadors, some of these sharing the toolkit resource with the European network of ombudspersons for children and at the UN headquarters in New York. And the bit that caught my eye down the bottom here is that Professor Reynolds was chair of the Cabinet Secretary for Education's expert panel on the future of SRE in Wales and consultant to the new health and wellbeing curriculum. The new relationships and sexuality education, which will be statutory for 5 to 16-year-olds, will be embedded in the curriculum and introduced in 2022. So my question is, who is this lady? What really goes on in her mind? Are her values the sorts of values that the average parent would want their children having or adopting? We don't know. But suddenly one woman has the power to influence the whole of the agenda in Wales. And this is how she does it in part, because she's into the schools supposedly consulting with young people. But of course, what's going on here, Mike, is she's really putting the ideas in the heads of these children. This is brainwashing. It's very smooth, but it's very sophisticated. She is putting the agenda in the heads of the children. They echo it back, and then it becomes their point of view. So you can see from some of the images that I've captured that these are pretty young teenage girls. And this is one of the things that the professor thinks is helping to education. She is wearing a skirt of rulers, and apparently the rulers are covered in graffiti, which might be sort of against women or against feminists or anything like that. And this really caught my eye because we've got some comments on plates. So on the green one, it says teachers need to go on courses to learn about the new SRE curriculum in order to provide children with as much information on each topic as possible. It's been written in a way that we're led to believe a child has written that, Mike. I find this very interesting because I don't believe a child wrote this. I think an adult wrote it, trying to make it in a childish hand. And then it's on the red plate, it says, stop teaching everything negatively. We've got immature minds, and I mean that in an appropriate way. These are immature minds. They're being taught to challenge normality, and that is then forming government opinion in Wales.
It's very interesting. You didn't see yesterday's news program, but we showed a little bit of video with Bana of Aleppo, the little girl from Aleppo that is commenting on Syria, and she was speaking clearly, either having learned lines verbatim or having whether she had an earpiece in her ear that was prompting her, we don't know. But the language that she was using, the form of words, the sentences that she was coming out with were clearly not age appropriate.
No.
And that's similar to what we see here.
Indeed. Some of our viewers have already said, well, this is nonsense. And I'm going to come back and say, no, this isn't nonsense because it is so dangerous. This is calculated policy. These are calculated, applied psychological techniques being used on the children. This is very dangerous, orchestrated brainwashing of the children. And I was very curious that to see what had been written on the plates, because going back many years ago, one of the ladies who'd had a very bad experience with training by Common Purpose told me that part of her training weekend involved writing things on paper plates. And at the time she told me that, it seemed very strange as a game which people from quite high-level businesses would have been involved in, but we're now starting to see the technique mirrored here with the children. We'll leave it there. Of course, children form the next generation. If you capture the minds of the children, then the policy is already in place for the future, which is why the government says that no child should be left behind. This is nothing to do with protecting children. This is to do with taking the minds of children to get that communitarian fascist state in place. We'll leave it there. Have a think about what we've shown you today. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow. Bye-bye.